12 American presidents, one legendary photographer. We speak to Harry Benson, the man who's photographed every American president since Dwight D Eisenhower. Will Joe Biden be lucky 13? Join us on the Alex Salmond Show, on air and online.
Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Last Saturday, some 4 days after the election, Senator Joe Biden became President-elect Joe Biden, now in line to become the 46th President of the United States, with the highest ever popular vote in American history, and with the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris becoming the first woman, and indeed first woman of colour, to ever hold that office. Joe Biden's success and President Trump's departure was widely welcomed across the world. However, our guest today had a very special reason for interest in the change of tenure in the White House. Today, Alex interviews legendary photographer Harry Benson, the man who has portrait studied every sitting American president since Dwight Eisenhower. Today, we look at presidential politics, but with a difference, through the lens of Harry Benson. But first, to your tweets, messages and emails. Now, Alex started last week's show with a very personal tribute to a special friend of his. And Andrew says, a very moving, powerful and personal tribute to Sir Sean Connery by Alex Salmond. A light has dimmed in our universe, but it will shine on in our memories and hopes for the future. Magnificent poetry. Thank you, Alex, says Andrew. Caroline says, in relation to the rest of the show, which covered COVID, a really fascinating discussion. Let's hope decision makers are taking note of the learning. I look forward to hearing about the different approaches adopted in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Early evidence suggests that Ireland's 5 levels are making a positive impact. Leslie says, Alex, thank you for your programme. So informative. Policy regarding public health should never have been difficult. It should have been portrayed the way Dr. Barrett and Professor Burns are discussing. Maureen says, brilliant show. This is the way it should have been done from the start of the pandemic. Many lives could have been saved. Dee says, being negative or isolating symptom-free is a waste of time if you can still catch it or be carrying it. And finally, Janet says, the mixed messages and lack of sensible restrictions have been terrible. The simple solution is copy the New Zealand approach. It was a short and sharp lockdown, but now everything is nearly back to normal. Of course, this week has brought news of exciting progress towards vaccination. However, in the months before it can be generally deployed, public health measures will still remain our only real protection against this virus, so stay safe. And now to today's interview. Harry Benson Cbe is Glasgow's most famous photographer, and in his long, illustrious career, his lens has captured everyone from Her Majesty the Queen to Jackie Kennedy to Elizabeth Taylor. However, one of his most notable achievements has been to photograph the last 12 American presidents in office, until that is, Donald Trump broke the run. Alex takes up the story with Harry Benson.
I'm now delighted to be joined from Florida by legendary photographer Harry Benson. Harry, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
It's a pleasure. I've waited all my life to be on it. And here I am. It's just happened.
Harry, the 12 American presidents photographed by you, but the outgoing president and you, Donald Trump, they didn't have an altogether even relationship. Are you hoping to get on much better with incoming Joe Biden?
If I hear, and I've met Joe Biden, he's a nice guy. You know, he's not, he's very agreeable.
But Donald Trump broke the run. He wouldn't let you into the White House, although you'd taken his photograph before then.
Oh, photographed him maybe 40 years. And I said this to him when I ran into him at some reception. I said to him, Donald, I'd like to come over and photograph you in the White House. And he said, no. I said, well, you know, Donald, I've known you for over 40 years. And you're saying no?
Because he didn't like the picture you took with him with all the money, I understand. He wasn't too happy with that picture.
Well, it did show greed. and he offered it. Because he had taken over a casino. I said, this is just wonderful, done all that money. He said, I can go in there and I can get $1 million right now, and it's mine. And I told him, I said, I've never photographed $1 million. I don't think I've ever seen it. And he said, you've got it. So we spent about half an hour piling up $1 million. And he wanted it to be actually $1 million, and it was. So I didn't want any fake picture.
And did you manage to slip any of the bundles away, Harry, or did he count them all back into the safe?
I got them straight over to this fellow I know in Glasgow. He's going to look after some of it, you know.
I don't think the Donald inherited much of his mother's sense of irony, Harry. I think irony is a stranger to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and also his sense of humour. No sense of humour. So that is good to make fun of him because he doesn't understand.
Harry, I'm going to take you right back to the picture with Eisenhower, which was your first president.
Yeah. Oh, yes, sorry. I was just thinking about Eisenhower. I photographed him, first of all, in London. He was smaller than I thought he was. And I remember he arrived at Claridge's in his limousine. But he didn't want to be seen in a limousine. So he got out and basically walked towards the photographers and to show that he was fit, and that's what I think. And he stood tall, and he was a gentleman. And I photographed him afterwards as well. I also photographed him playing around the golf in Turnberry.
And strangely enough, of course, Turnberry is now in the hands of Donald Trump. So I don't know how President Eisenhower would feel about that. But you also photographed John F. Kennedy in London. Tell us a bit about the Kennedy visit to London.
It wasn't just John F. Kennedy. It was Jackie. and his wife took it by storm because she was great looking and this glamour. And then after they're finished with London, they now go to Paris. And the French loved her. They loved her clothes. And that was a big deal, that how would the French think about how she dressed, because they thought every American dressed awful.
So you were the photographer who accompanied John F. Kennedy to London and Paris, is that correct?
Yes, I did. I mean, there were me and a few others, you know.
You took a photograph of Jackie Kennedy in London in a car, which has almost a luminosity about her. You took a photograph of Princess Diana with a crowd, which showed some of the empathy which she had. These people, they had to have that ability to communicate visually, and they must be a photographer's dream.
Yeah, no, Jackie was. She had taken London by storm, really. Every moment of the day, she was enjoying it. But she took Paris more. Paris, they went, ooh la la, over her. They loved her. And the French were, you know, they're so critical, especially on women, how they dressed. But not with Jackie. It was that she wiped the floor with them.
Now, I want to ask you about your portrait of Richard Nixon, because you photographed him in the final days of his presidency. Yes,
I did. And when people ask me who was my favorite president, I would say Nixon. Because the one thing about Nixon was there was no small talk. He asked, and he would ask you for dinner, breakfast, and if you're on the plane, the press plane, or you were near him, he would send you a drink, find out what Mr. Benson wants to drink. I found it very pleasant being with Nixon and his family.
You probably heard you were a Glaswegian, Harry, when he sent you the drink.
I think it would have might have worked the opposite for me. I found him to be very easy to work with.
But that must have been a very dramatic time, you know, in these last hours as president, when you photographed him as he was about to demit office under the threat of impeachment. That must have been an extraordinary time for a photographic study of someone.
It was it was terribly sad, because there was also his family were with him. They were in tears. They were just devastated by it. And after it was all over, Nixon goes to his elevator to go back to his room, and he just sort of slumped onto his wife's shoulder. He broke down. You know, it was a very sad moment. A photograph doesn't lie. And Nixon felt safe with this. I'm sure it was for history. You know, it wants it recorded of how he was that day.
Now, if I can take you to happier moments in a presidential term, the famous picture you took with the Reagans, an astonishing picture of them dancing, a picture, I understand, which actually saved a very famous magazine.
Yeah, it was for Vanity Fair, and they were going to close the magazine. What I'm about to say to you is completely self-serving, because that picture saved Vanity Fair. I mean, this is documented. Cy Newhouse, the owner, was going to close the magazine, and Tina Brown, the editor, went to him and said, "We've got this thing coming up of the Reagans, and I'm sure it's going to sell a lot of copies." And it did. And I got the Reagans to dance. And the magazine was sold out.
And that was a picture of a presidential couple very much in love. And of course, you had another famous picture of a presidential couple, the picture of the Clintons' kiss. Now, I have to ask you, was that put on for the camera, or was that how you felt, a depiction of their relationship?
I think they were in love. He was relaxing on the hammock, and Hillary would be about 10 yards away, stretched out, and she says, "I'm not going to let him get away with this." So she runs over and basically gets on top of him, and they start to kiss. And then it was over, never happened again. It's a moment you really are, being a photographer, a spontaneous moment that can't be repeated and will not be repeated because it was spontaneous, you know.
So, Harry, we're all looking forward to you getting the call from the incoming President Biden to take his picture in White House surroundings. Have you any thoughts of how you might depict him, or is that something that can only happen when you see the circumstances of the day?
Circumstances of the day, but what I hear, he's a good guy. I hear that I photographed him before, but in a different setting, and it all depends who you're representing. If I'm with Vanity Fair and I'm with Life, I'm going to get much better attention than if I was with a Hamilton Advertiser.
Stay with us for more from Harry Benson and his photographic exclusives. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back. Alex is in conversation with Harry Benson about the icons he has known. His work has taken him to the scene of many historic moments of both triumph and tragedy since the 1960s.
So, Harry Benson, in the 1960s, your career took a different turn because you travelled to America, but you travelled with a very famous group of people. What happened then?
I stayed in America, basically, because I tell you why. America was very interesting then. There was the civil rights. There was just a lot happening in America.
You travelled there with the Beatles and you took an extraordinary picture of the Fab Four in a pillow fight. Tell me about that, Harry.
Yes, we were having a drink, and I suggested a pillow fight. Now, I'd heard them mention that the day before when we were all just messing about in the room, that, like, John might have said that was a terrible pillow fight we had. And I thought, maybe it's not a bad picture. I'll think about this. Anyway, I'm in the room with the Beatles the following night, and I said, how about a pillow fight? And the rest kind of nodded, and John Lennon said, no, we'll look childish. You know, they were, because they were breaking records in all their sales, and they were becoming very rich in these few days. Anyway, they agreed not to do it. Then John disappears in the room for seconds, and Paul is sitting having a drink on the couch, and John comes up behind him with a pillow and bangs it off. Of course, it splatters all over the place, and then there's the pillow fight. I just kept shooting there. I just kept taking picture after picture of them, not telling them what to do.
And then you photographed the Beatles with Muhammad Ali. Now, you must have had the five most famous people in the world in that photograph at that time.
You know, someone said that to me the other day there, the most photographed people in the world. Muhammad Ali had won the title, and the Beatles didn't want to meet them because, you know, they thought it wasn't right to be with a boxer. Anyway, I get him in with Ali. We go to his training place. Now, the Beatles are such smart asses. They had a retort. They were glib, just obnoxious with people. They would put them in their place. Not with him. He was ready for them. He said, things like, you all think you're beautiful, but you're not more beautiful than I am. Girls love me better than they love you. You know, you're just little punks. Oh, no, it was... He put them in their place. And he said, now lie down. And he had them lying on the ground. Now turn over. He treated them like children. And after it was over, John Lennon, who I would say was the leader of the Beatles, he said, that didn't go well. He made us look like monkeys. And it's all your fault, Harry. Because I arranged it. But Muhammad Ali was way ahead of them.
But never mind, Harry, you got the photograph. And these were basically happy moments with the Beatles and Ali. But of course, you also photographed some of the great tragedies that were happening in America at that time. And in particular, you were present and photographing at the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Tell us what happened there.
Well, Kennedy was... I knew Bobby. I liked Bobby. I knew I'm still friendly with his family. It's awful to move from a happy situation, like he had won California, and Bobby said something and on to Chicago, and he never got out of the ballroom. He's walking. I would be about 5 yards behind him. And then the screaming started. I never saw the guy with the gun because of the crowd, but there was screaming, and the next thing you see is Bobby is down. But I'll never forget this, the screaming. It was like they were shouting another Dallas, because it was so close to Dallas with his brother. And people were just crying and banging their heads off. And I was saying to myself, let me mess up tomorrow. but this is too important. I've got to take photographs. I've got to do it. You know, there isn't 3 cheers for the photographer in places like that. They see you as an intruder, as you are. But I kept taking it and saying to myself, this is for history. This is anything. So I was photographing everything around me. And Bobby I knew he was gone. He was losing a lot of blood from the back of his head, but there it was. And at one time I was in the crush in the crowd. I was only about maybe a foot away from him, and he was looking up, and Ethel was screaming, asking for air, and it seemed forever before the ambulance people got to him, although I hear it was only about 6 minutes.
An extraordinary moment, and of course other assassinations in America at the time. You took a picture of Martin Luther King on the civil rights campaign trail, which reflected some of the enormous energy of the man. Do you have any reflections on Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement?
Very quiet. There was no chatting with him. It was he allowed you to do your job, but he wasn't talking about, hey, the Yankees, we're going to beat the Yankees, or none of that small talk, none of that.
Now, Harry, I'm going to take you right back to your origins as a photographer. And 2 things. The Peter Manuel story, to explain to our international viewers, he was a serial killer. He was the second last person to be hanged at capital punishment in Scotland. This is the late 1950s. And you, amazingly, as a very young photographer, managed to get into Barlinnie prison, and you were the only journalist who was able to photograph and speak to this mass murderer before his execution. Was that an extraordinary stroke of luck? Were you just in the right place at the right time? But it's an amazing story.
I knew the right people at the right man at the right time. The right man would be boxing promoter called Sammy Docherty. He knew individuals who knew Manuel. And it was what Sammy Docherty said went. If he said to these guys, I want you to get Big Harry in to meet Manuel, because another criminal's got a chance of knowing another one.
I want to ask you about 2 pictures. The very famous picture you took of children in the Gorbals in the early 60s, I think. And also a picture you took of the black communities in America during the civil rights movement. I was going to ask, I've always wanted to ask you, did you see any similarities between the conditions in your homeland and the deprived areas of Glasgow and the situation you found in the poorer communities in America during the civil rights movement?
Listen, if some of the people from Glasgow were living in Watts in California, they wouldn't be rioting. They would be having umbrellas to shelter them from the sun. They would be tanning. Really, their conditions. I mean, I'd seen much, much worse conditions in Glasgow. I mean, I did a story, remember, there were 14 living in one room.
Your career, Harry Benson, took you from photographing the slums of Glasgow to the photographing presidents in the White House, an astonishing array and album of photographs. I'm going to ask you the most difficult question of all. Do you have, of all that array of photographs, do you have an absolute favourite? The one you look at occasionally and say, I'm glad that Harry Benson took that picture?
I would say the Beatles. I don't think it's one picture, but I was lucky that I was the Beatles. I was lucky I got close with the Reagans. We're doing them a favour too, that we keep their image alive. I keep waiting to take my best picture. I don't think I've taken it. Although with the Kennedy assassination, I couldn't have gone any further because there were other people shot around me, very close to me. And I'm thinking of ones where I could have done better, you know. And there's a few.
And looking to the future, Harry, what's the picture you still want to take? Is there an image you'd still like to capture for history?
I would like to see more on the royal family. I'd like to see them having their breakfast. I'd like to see them having dinner because there's a lot of information there of how what their table manners are like. You know, that have they actually got a dog and a cushion beside them, you know?
You once took a picture of the Duke of Edinburgh with a toilet roll coming down in Edinburgh University, didn't you?
That's right, that's right. Well, that was a major photograph in my life because it was for the Daily Sketch. And they brought me to London because I was doing well up in Scotland.
And one thing's, Harry, you've never lost that accent either. Harry Benson, legendary photographer. Thank you so much for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
No, thank you very much. And thank you very much.
They say the camera never lies. And if that's true, then it follows that Harry Benson's presidential stories from behind the lens have a unique ring of authenticity. His portraits certainly have captured some essential White House truths, from the grace of the Reagans to the crassness of Trump, from the Clintons in love to Nixon in despair in his final hours as president. Harry Benson's work has taken him to some of the great moments which have shaped history, of both triumph and tragedy. How many of us would have wanted to be there when the Beatles met Muhammad Ali, or dreaded being present when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated? Harry Benson's work is a story of our times, and among the many changes expected of President Biden is to restore the world to its axis by quickly commissioning the Benson portrait. Indeed, I think it may even be mentioned somewhere in the Constitution. But for now, from myself, Alex, and all at the show, it's goodbye, stay safe, and we hope to see you all again next week.